Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sangham namassami. So it's the end of our winter retreat, 2021. Strange year. But we've been, as I've been saying, we've been very fortunate to have your support. And the son has been very diligent in practice. So it's been a wonderful time for me. And thank you for making that walking path. I haven't been doing much walking meditation the last few years, and I was so inspired by that. And I have the library beside me. I had that. Did a lot of sitting, walking. That's the kind of bread and butter of the forest tradition, isn't it? Sit, walk, and don't fill the mind. Don't get distracted. And just see what happens. And that, of course, is leading to right understanding. And I think right understanding is silence, as opposed to like a viewpoint. Luang Por used to talk about listening to a Dhamma talk with your heart rather than with your head, and that's a kind of good consideration of how we approach life. So what I think he meant, listen from your heart, is to put away the critical faculty, not in a stupid way. One still has the critical faculty, but to actually try to hear what the speaker is saying. And people who kind of attach to views, and quite often they don't really hear the speaker, they just hear their own critical mind and analyzing. It's not right, it's not right, it's the word, yeah, I think I agree with that, don't agree with that. So the mind's muttering away in some kind of critical fashion, which is okay. But to actually understand what a person is saying, you have to kind of put things away and really receive the person, which is an act of love, isn't it? Now, I was imagining like if you're taking a taxi somewhere and you have a Syrian driver and you want to engage him, and his English is horrible. You listen and you try to figure out, you try to imagine what's he trying to express, rather than correcting his grammar. Or if a child is trying to express something, and the child's excited or whatever, and having difficulty getting the words out, you don't say, calm down and just say it correctly. You listen. What are you actually trying to convey, or what are you saying? And that I think is the way of listening with a heart, and that's a very good model for meditation too. The kind of critical faculty, the bhavana, figuring it out and getting something, comes from a bias of your own, of history, one's preconceived notions of how things are, and trying to attain to something. Whereas the kind of, listening to the child say something is a kind of heartfelt, open quality of receiving the person. It doesn't mean that we don't, we can still disagree, but if there isn't that first openness to a statement from someone else, then you don't get entry into where their hearts are. And then also, if we don't have that with ourselves, and with our own meditation, our own mind, if you never have that entry into what really is going on, then we're just becoming from some preconceived conceit. I would say it's a conceit, isn't it? And then constantly trying to realize something from that conceit, or kind of always adjudicating it, or adjusting it, or whatever it is, but never actually entering into the moment of how things are. And so in that sense, right understanding is not a critical thing. It's the silence of the mind. as opposed to kind of like a viewpoint. So people who kind of are very opinionated, like Ajahn Chah would say, Westerners, viditi mak, have a lot of opinions. There's a kind of cleverness in you get books like Westerners will write a book, The Essence of Buddhism. Like I really know. I've been practicing Buddhism for 20 years. And then you get Asia. You get this whole kind of culture of Ajahn Chah or whoever it might be. So the kind of bias in the Western culture is not of the heart, it's of the head. And then, which is okay, but there's a lot of conceit in the head. And a kind of, and that we call Dittupadana. So we have Samaditi, Michaditi, and Dittupadana. Sama is right understanding, Micha is wrong understanding, and Dittupadana is one of the great problems of the intellect. And so the way holding to views requires a constant re-holding of views. You have to keep re-energizing that, and the kind of sense of self which comes, and the kind of conceit which comes from that, and the need to uphold that. Where silence doesn't need anything. It doesn't require all that constructing. And the idea of Buddhist freedom is the unconstructed, the unconditioned. And that's why thought is so difficult to let go of, because it can be a false security. I think one of the reasons I went to India, I'm trying to remember when I first came to that fabulous book, the Autobiography of a Yogi. It was like everyone was reading, among my peers at that time, wow, that's different. And nothing in Western culture had the kind of, because Western culture to me lacked, maybe now more, it just lacked any idea of the rishi or the spiritual seeker. So it was a kind of impoverished culture for me. We had art and all that, and good democratic values, but there's something about Asia, India, Thailand, where the rishi, the seeker of truth, the God realized, that was very much lacking. Maybe that's why. One speculates it's so long ago. But certainly, when I saw that Autobiography of Yogi, I didn't understand anything about it. But I said, I think I'll go to India. And so I went to India. And it's interesting for me, because 2021 marks 50 years when I decided to become a monk. So in 1971 I was in Almora and had some insights, and then I decided to become a bhikkhu. So it's like an interesting chunk of time, 50 years. You could say it's arbitrary, but it's always interesting. And now, this past year, I've had all these connections with India, including Venerable Amritsar before that, and the Delhi group, and so it's kind of a nice feeling of synchronicity and full circle. And I don't know if you'll allow me to say this, but we've been reading Ramakrishna Paramahamsa's biography by Lexicon, which I read many years ago, and I had read his Prajna Paramita too, and I love his devotional language. It's just so over the top. So I thought, let me see, I might enjoy this. So while he gives me a foot massage, I've been reading chapters of this ecstatic biography of Ramakrishna. I've always enjoyed reading with his mother, Teresa of Avila, or Rumi, or these kind of ecstatic side of the religious experience, which Theravada doesn't display so much. I'm sure it exists. So we're reading this thing, and then I found out today that his Brahmin name is Ramakrishna. So I'm reading this biography of Ramakrishna, and it's just over the top Indian devotion bhakti. It's just great. It's like one ecstatic party after another. It's so different to whatever. And then he tells me that he can erase this if he doesn't like this. But in Brahmin culture, when you introduce yourself to an elder or teacher, you say the lineage of your rishis that created your clan. We call it Gopa, Gora, I forget. And then you finally say your Brahmin name, and his is Ramakrishna. So that's just beautiful. It's the synchronicity of reading his biography, and think, well, he looks really happy. What's going on? And I found that out. And that kind of beauty, and I think Pablo experienced that a lot in Thailand. The kind of beauty of the Kuba Ajahns, these beings, Luang Por and other beings we meet, in a culture where the enlightened being is the highest, and the God realization or realization of Nibbana or whatever you want to call it is the highest aspiration, and all the bhakti and faith and generosity which flows from that high ideal. And so people like us, like monks in Thailand, I was thinking, talking with Vipassana, trying to tell him how good he's got it. And my early days, I say, oh, monks always say my early days, you wouldn't know. But I was thinking, well, how do I actually survive the first 2 years where, their culture was such a wasteland, really. But actually, I was in a culture of generosity. And I saw Ajahn Chah frequently, but he often sent me away. And I think one doesn't know it was so long ago. But that culture of if you want to go for Nibbana, we're gonna support you. Go for it. You're our guy. And there wasn't the kind of demand that, okay, you will be happy, we are feeding you, or you can be grateful. Just give it a go, and keep going, keep going. So it was like in Northeast Thailand it's such a religious place. That's such a spiritual part of Thailand. There's so much faith and good moral values, and this great sense of Kuba Ajahns, enlightened beings. So like Ajahn Jerry Sarro says, if one were to rather than using GDP for the wealth of a society, if one were to judge the wealth of the society by the number of arhats it's produced, then Isan would be a superpower. And they look like, yeah, it's true. And that's one of the, so like coming back into this culture is rewarding, because I'm really grateful to be in Canada, and Toronto was good to me, and to try to bring in a kind of wisdom teaching, and then from the Asian folk to have like our friends come from Kingston, right? They're just so fun, so much spirit and joy and generosity, and so or just this ceremony which we did now. It's different than a sharing you have on a retreat. The sharing on a retreat is nice, it's sweet. It's a bit of like Oscars. I would like to thank my mother and it's fun. But here we had this ceremony, and I was just watching it. Everyone was in a posture of deference and in a posture of humility, and we all know the ritual. It was just so beautiful. It's just so utterly beautiful. Not because we said anything significant, but because we acted in a way which is significant. We used our bodies and we recited something together as a group, and it wasn't like an individual kind of experience. It wasn't about me, even though there's a senior monk where one asks for forgiveness. It's really about us, because we're doing this. And these are beautiful things that Asia gives us. Very, very beautiful, very beautiful. And So that the critical faculty sometimes doesn't really kind of see how important that is. Right? But when you actually live it and do it, you say, oh yeah, there is that part which plugs into life in a whole different way. So when I read Autobiography, I must read that again, see how it would affect me now. But when I read Autobiography of Yogi, I was then, I think I was in Europe somewhere, and I just kept bumping into people who would say, go to India. I remember going, like in Spain, I was trying to obtain some kind of, kind of like a grass type material. And I think the Guardia Civil was still around. And this guy, I met him and he showed me something. And he said, he looked at me and said, I think you'll enjoy India. So I kept getting these signs. And then I hitchhiked to India. Then I hitchhiked to buses to India. And as soon as I got out of Pakistan into India, I thought, oh yeah, this is going to be cool. Or something like that. And then like the first temple I came to was the Amritsar Temple for the Sikhs. That's their holiest place. And it was like so different. The harmonium going and someone reciting their holy verses and then food being offered to people in gurdwaras. It was so different. And then I had the most extraordinary experience in Bombay. I was... I had run out of, I had like $20 left and I was a bit worried. And my brother was sending me some money through American Express in Bombay. And it wasn't coming through and I was getting worried and I was walking around with my head on my chest and poor me, poor me. Meanwhile, if an Indian around me had $20, some of these people were very poor. And I ended up, I don't know, some back street and there's a street sweeper there. And somehow, I can't remember, we connected. He looked at me and I liked the look of his eyes. And they ended up sitting on the concrete with him. I wasn't out of it. And he shared a beedi with me. And, it was like, and he had so much love in his eyes. And here I was, a rich Westerner, relatively. And this guy probably... he swept 100 meters of street, and if he didn't sweep it, he wouldn't eat. And that was his life, and that was his... And he had so much more wisdom than me. It's just this kind of love radiating from him. I said, ooh. And that kind of magical nature of India, I think, struck many people. And India's, it's a kind of love-hate relationship, right? You deal with a lot of stuff there, and then constantly like sadhus and temples and that kind of that spirit. So that when I eventually made it around through Kerala and all the way up to Nepal and then to Almora, I was in Nepal and I couldn't get a visa. I was sitting in a coffee shop, you probably heard this one, but it was interesting. Sitting in a coffee shop, one of those Western where you have sticky buns. And I just hear these people talking behind me. There's a guy in Almora who's got a fruit farm and he hires Westerners. Okay, I'll go there. So I left Nepal, found out where Almora was. I mean, it's just like, well, yeah, try that. And went up into Almora. I wanted to be in the mountains. Couldn't find the guy. But then that kind of opened up for me, and I ended up staying a year there, being inspired and making a determination to become a bhikkhu. So India holds a great significance for me. And then, of course, going to Thailand, another country where there's this effusion of... I mean, I've always lived in kind of Ajahn Chah bubbles, so I know Thailand has many things. But this kind of outpouring of optimism and hopefulness in the spiritual life. This is very uplifting. So, 50 years later, here we are. Got my own Ramakrishna. Amazing. When he told me that, I said, really? And how deep their cultures that still they have a genealogy which they recite. I mean, that's so deep culture that they have there. So I feel very fortunate. Very fortunate indeed. So I'll finish there.
Namayang Ovadatamma Kataya Sadhu Karang Dadamasi.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
Listen, homies, yep.
Arahang
Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivadini
Svakato
Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasam
Supatipanno
Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Sangham Namam